Welcome to the Metal Verbalizers podcast. There are a lot of hardworking musicians and great music in underground metal. We want to support this, so we started this podcast. We also want to share the great underground music with you listening. If you enjoy this podcast, your support is very important, because the more people who find us, the more we can support the bands that we verbalize. In this episode, I will introduce a band by talking about the band's sound, influences, lyrics, name, future plans, and more. We're contacting the bands and asking them some questions. This episode is based on the band's answers. I'm Johan Verbalizer, and this episode will be dedicated to the band Space Parasites. Space Parasites is a thrash metal band from Germany and was started in 2017. The band was originally started by drummer Willy and bass player Diana. They both knew the guitarist Daschke since before, so it made a lot of sense asking him if he was interested in joining the band. He quickly said yes to that idea, and the band now had a guitarist. On the other hand, the search for a singer was significantly much harder. For example, one of the hard requirements was that the singer must be female. I personally don't know their exact reason for that, but it was something that the band considered very important. They could only think about one person they knew that could fit that role, Nadine. Even though they hadn't met her or talked to her in a long time, she immediately said yes when asked to join Space Parasites. Like the band describes it, quote, "No one knew that her voice sounded so incredibly strange, but it was a perfect fit." At this point, the first lineup of Space Parasites was officially formed, and the band was now ready to start working. Currently, during the recording of this episode, the Space Parasites discography is the demo, A Date with Thrash Doctor from 2018, the single Space Stripper from 2019, as well as the album Raw and Violent from 2019, which was followed out by the second album The Spellbound Witch from 2022. When it comes to the main influences of the Space Parasites, there's quite an interesting mix here, like Priest, Megadeth, Sodom, Alice Cooper, Cradle of Filth, and Amon Amarth, etc. As well as things like The Devil's Blood, Jex Toth, Fields of Nephilim, and things like that. The members are also big fans of attending classical concerts, but classical music isn't really like a super prominent part in the sound of Space Parasites. They do not implement any like symphonic elements or something like that, but I guess that doesn't necessarily mean that it hasn't affected their sound, but in a more indirect way, so to speak. The band have described the sound of the first album, Raw and Violent, as living up to its name. The band made this album very quickly. Apparently the band recorded the album within like a week. I would agree with this description. Something I really enjoy about this one is that it has this type of almost kind of like a sort of punk-like thrash sound that reminds me a lot of like the kind of old school type thrash sound, with songs like Mutant Killer Lies, for example, going for a kind of almost rock and roll sound. Which is a really cool mix, so I would definitely recommend checking that one out. When Space Parasites made the second album, The Spellbound Witch, however, they wanted to take their time a little bit more, it seems. The band considers this album as being kind of more refined, harder, and more serious than the first one. Maybe as a result of them taking more time, though, to make it, compared to the album Raw and Violent. I would generally agree with this as well. Even though I really enjoy Raw and Violent, of course, I think it is kind of noticeable that the band did take more time with this one. Regardless which one of these two albums you would start with, I'm feeling very sure that you will enjoy it. However, I would probably recommend starting with the Spellbound Witch, actually. I personally think it is a little bit of a better introduction to the band. It's kind of like, I guess, if you would introduce someone to Slayer, for example, you would probably suggest that they would start with an album like Rain in Blood. But that doesn't necessarily mean that albums like Show No Mercy or Hell Awaits aren't as good as Rain in Blood. But Rain in Blood might just be a better introduction, so to speak. That's kind of similar how I feel about Space Parasites and recommending the Spellbound Witch. When it comes to the image of Space Parasites, the band have summarized their style as basically studs, leather, tattoos, and loud music. The member Dushke is responsible for the band's artwork. He's also a tattoo artist and a big fan of B-movies. This of course is a big advantage for the band in terms of making cool and interesting artwork. Initially, Dushke wanted to draw a cover for the band's album Raw and Violent, but as I mentioned before, the band spent a lot of time and effort on the music. We are talking like singing 14 songs in one day and playing guitar for like 23 hours in 2 days. So when it came to drawing a cover, Dushke just didn't feel like doing that. He basically thought, screw it, I'm not drawing a cover. My favorite guitar is so fucked up, covered in blood. The right cover is ready. But when Space Parasite was going to release their next album, The Spellbound Witch, they felt like the album was in need of a great cover. Since they had much more time for this album, Dushke was able to draw this one. The artwork is showing like a nasty witch with a grim mood. This made a lot of sense since witch is a recurring theme on the album. Personally, I think this is an awesome cover. I believe The Spellbound Witch was the album that introduced me personally to Space Parasites, and the artwork was definitely something that caught my attention. And this could be another reason, by the way, why I would probably recommend starting with The Spellbound Witch, because that's the one that made me a fan of the band. When it comes to the lyrics of Space Parasites, all the members seem to be involved. For the album Raw and Violent, Dushke wrote most of the lyrics, which are heavily inspired by the B-movies he likes. Apparently, Dushke sometimes went up in the middle of the night, wrote a song and then went back to bed. I thought it was pretty funny, and I personally really admire that type of creativity, so I felt like I had to mention that. There's mention of a witch in the lyrics on Raw and Violent, which is a subject that Nadine continued on The Spellbound Witch, which the title itself suggests, of course. On The Spellbound Witch, I think Nadine wrote at least most of the lyrics. These are very influenced by old school horror movies like the classics with like Vincent Price and books by authors like Lovecraft, Blackwood, and King, etc. The band finds a lot of inspiration from these movies and books. It seems like the next Space Parasites album will continue exploring these type of themes. It also seems like all the members have been more involved in the lyrics than for the previous albums, but as far as I understand, Nadine is still writing most of the lyrics for that one. When it comes to the band name, the 3 founding members sat down and started discussing a band name. They wanted an edgy and sharp but readable name. They had a lot of ideas and potential names in mind. They wanted something ugly, mean and grim. Something original and that is memorable. Eventually they basically came up with Space Parasites. They felt it works and fits really well. It's also a cool name for the band since they are big fans of horror movies. Kinda sounds to me like the kind of name of an old school horror movie. Like you know, the type of names like Attack of the Space Parasites. I mean, it could work. It could work as a horror movie for sure. So I think it's a great name, for sure. For the future, Space Parasites is very focused on their upcoming album, which I am personally very excited for. The band will enter the studio to record this album sometime in early 2025. Since Space Parasites have a new bass player and drummer, the band sees a lot of new possibilities to develop their sound. Space Parasites have described this upcoming album as being very well-rounded, with some new influences, as well as being harder, meaner and more complex than the previous albums. Which is a description that I think sounds very, very interesting. As I mentioned before, I'm a very big fan of the two albums that are currently released, so based on the things the band have described the upcoming album as, and considering what the band has done before, I'm very, very excited for this. So I would strongly encourage you to keep your eyes open for this one. Another big priority for Space Parasites, however, is of course playing live shows. They have only played a few shows lately, but they want to play more shows more frequently. Space Parasites is currently looking for a booking agency. They really feel like playing in more places than only Berlin. So if you listening have any ideas and can help Space Parasites with this, definitely contact them. But the upcoming album is a main priority right now. I would like to end this episode with a quote from Space Parasites. Quote, "Turn off the TV and turn on the music, because we're all heavy metal animals, and hopefully you are too. Stay healthy and full of hope. Stay metal and loud." End of quote. These are my thoughts and comments about the band, but I would like to hear your thoughts. What do you think about Space Parasites? Do you have a favorite song by this band? If so, which one? Let us know in the YouTube comments or on social media. We have now reached the end of this episode. It means a lot to me that you've been listening all the way to the end. I really appreciate that. If you want to support us, great ways of doing so are subscribing on YouTube, as well as following on Spotify, Facebook and Instagram. While you're on Spotify, feel free to also rate the podcast, as well as generally liking, commenting and sharing. All of this can be done very quickly, very easily and completely free. But it would really help the podcast and the bands we verbalize. We would be very thankful. We will be back to verbalize again next week.